Rome was built on 7 hills, but it fell because of one valley. 378 Adrianople, the Battle of Adrianople, is one of those dates in history that you just have to remember. Because within this date, we are going to see the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of the Gothic people. And if you want to know why this is so important, then stick around until the end when I'll show you what happens next. But for now, let's get into today's video. Starting off with some context, during the late 300s, Rome had just emerged from a period of civil war. The rule of Diocletian was over, and now the empire was ruled by a new ruler, a former soldier named Valens. Now, while he was able to secure peace, his empire was surrounded by enemies. To the north were the Goths. They were migrating into the Balkans, and they had been raiding Roman territories for years. So much so that the Romans had already tried to fight them and lost. For example, there was this battle where the Goths ambushed the Roman army. The Romans were unable to escape because their ships got stuck on a sandbar, and the Goths hunted them down and killed them all. However, this victory didn't make the Goths popular among the other barbarians. In fact, a few years later, another Gothic king would try to unite the various tribes under his banner. His name was Alaric, and he wanted to be known as the King of Kings. But to do this, he needed to defeat the Romans first. This made Valens send out his own army to stop Alaric before he could cause too much trouble. The man he sent was a general named Lupicinus. However, he failed to stop the Gothic leader and even joined the Goths after he got defeated. Soon enough, the entire Gothic army was poised to invade Rome. And now Valens realized that he made a big mistake. To prepare for the incoming invasion, Valens went to the city of Adrianople, which was close to the Gothic border. He gathered up his troops and waited for the enemy to come to him. There were about 20,000 Romans waiting, with 12,000 of them being infantry. On the other side, there were an estimated 40,000 Goths, twice the size of the Roman force. Yet despite being outnumbered, the Romans felt confident. Why? Well, because their army was stronger. The Romans had better armor and weapons. They had cavalry who were experts in horseback riding. And most importantly, they had superior generalship. Valens was a decorated war hero, and his second in command was a man named Valentinian. Not only was he a great strategist, but he was also related to Valens. And so it seemed like the Romans were going to win. But things took a turn when Alaric came up with a battle plan that involved a lot of misdirection. It started off normal enough. The Goths pretended to attack from the front, and the Romans fell for it. They left the safety of their fortified camp and rode out to engage the enemy. Meanwhile, the rest of the Goths snuck to the side of the battlefield and hid in a forest. At first, the Romans were doing well. They were able to chase the Goths back into the forest, and they thought they were winning. But then the Goths that were hiding in the trees came out of nowhere and attacked the Roman flanks. This caused a lot of panic in the Roman ranks. Their cavalry started to retreat back to the safety of the camp. But the problem was that they left the infantry behind. Now the infantry started getting overwhelmed. They couldn't fight off 2 entire Gothic armies, so they started panicking as well, and soon they were running away. But there was nowhere to hide. The forest was full of Goths, and the camp was already filled with cavalry. So the Roman soldiers did the unthinkable. They ran through the forest, straight into the jaws of the Gothic army. What happened next was one of the greatest massacres in Roman history. Most of the infantry didn't make it out alive, and neither did Valens. Even though the exact details are debated by historians, most sources agree that he died trying to rally his troops, or maybe while protecting a group of civilians. Either way, the Roman army was destroyed and the emperor was dead. But how exactly did Rome respond to this disaster? To answer this question, let's zoom out for a bit and look at the empire itself. Rome wasn't just a military machine. It was a collection of provinces and territories that were spread across 3 continents. And to govern these lands, they created a system of administration. The empire was divided into smaller sections, each governed by a magistrate. These men would collect taxes, maintain public order, and run the day-to-day operations of the government. They were appointed by the emperor and served at his pleasure. But now that Valens was dead, many of these officials were out of a job. One of these people was a man named Theodosius, who was the governor of the province of Pannonia. When he heard about the Battle of Adrianople, he didn't do anything. He basically sat around and waited for the next emperor to tell him what to do. But the problem was that no one was coming. The Gothic army was still out in the open, and they weren't making any moves against Rome. So Theodosius took matters into his own hands and declared himself emperor. Then he spent the next 3 years putting down rebellions and restoring order to the provinces. Now, by 382 A, he controlled most of the western half of the empire. Meanwhile, on the eastern side, there was a different emperor. His name was Gratian, and he wasn't happy that the empire was split in 2. So he asked Theodosius to give up the title of emperor or else face the consequences. At first, Theodosius tried to negotiate, but the talks failed, and soon enough, the 2 emperors were at war. It lasted for 4 years, and in the end, Theodosius won. He expanded his territory and even invaded the Balkans. Yet despite winning, he didn't bring the empire together. Instead, he just expanded the division between East and West. This led to the creation of 2 separate empires, which both claimed to be the true Roman Empire. In the West, there was the Western Roman Empire, and in the East, there was the Byzantine Empire. So why does this matter? Well, let's go back in time to when Alaric invaded Rome. He slaughtered the Roman army, but he didn't destroy it. There were plenty of soldiers who survived the battle, and they continued to fight alongside the Goths. But after defeating Rome, Alaric and the Goths had nothing to do. So they started to settle down in the Balkans. With the support of the Romans, they started building cities and farming the land. In fact, Alaric was considered a Roman ally for a while. But as the years went on, the Goths became more and more restless. They wanted more power and influence, so they started to rebel against Rome. In 409 A, Alaric and his army invaded Gaul. They sacked several Roman cities, and they even fought against other Germanic tribes. Meanwhile, in Italy, a different Gothic king was causing problems. His name was Theodemir, and he raided the countryside, stealing food and gold. But he would later become famous for sacking Rome. It happened in 410 AD, and it was a shock to the entire Roman world. For the first time in history, Rome was sacked by an enemy. And it wouldn't be the last time either. A few years later, the Visigoths invaded again, but this time they were led by a new king, Alaric II. He was defeated by the Romans at the Battle of Veii, but the damage was already done. Both battles shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. People throughout Europe saw what the Goths were capable of. And the next thing you know, you had groups from all over the region wanting to try it for themselves. But wait a minute, I said that the Western Roman Empire would fall because of one valley. Where's the connection? Well, after losing to the Goths, Rome began to focus all of its efforts on defending itself. They built giant walls around their cities and focused on garrisoning the borders. But this required a lot of money and manpower. And since the Goths kept attacking, Rome found itself in a never-ending cycle of raising taxes and drafting soldiers. It was a downward spiral. Rome was becoming weaker and weaker every single year. Meanwhile, the Gothic people were only getting stronger. After they pillaged Rome, they started conquering new territories. The first king to do this was Alaric II. He seized control of Aquitaine and Septimania. It was the last major territorial conquest of the Western Roman Empire, and it pretty much sealed the fate of Rome. In 425 AD, the Western Roman Empire would officially fall. but that's going to be covered in the next video. If you want to watch that, please subscribe. Also, feel free to check out my page in the description below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.